All right, so we have a special guest today, Craig Mundie. Thanks for coming on Channel 9.
Happy to be here.
Appreciate your time. So I guess the first thing...
for me.
Excellent. The first thing that would be nice to know is, so you're the Chief Research and Strategy Officer.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, it really means two things. There's a whole portfolio of things I do, really. I've been, for a long time, I'll say Bill's closest partner, probably for 8 years now, in thinking about what the company has to do in the long term, both in a business strategy point of view and from a long-term technology point of view. And so in this change, as Bill exits the company over the next 2 years, it was quite natural for me to pick up both the line responsibility that he had, which was to manage our global research operation that Rick Rashid runs, and also for me to formalize my role as having to deal with the longer-term issues that the company faces in planning its technology roadmap and planning its business strategy.
Excellent. So, in other words, you oversee everything that goes on in research.
That's true. I've been very closely aligned with Rick and Dan and the people around the world in the research labs. I've done my own reviews of their work for the last 7 or 8 years. But now, Rashid moves over and reports to me directly, and I do have line responsibility for that global part of our operation.
So that brings up an interesting question, the relationship between research and strategy. So it's basically a two-way interaction, right? So research isn't driving strategy, and strategy is not. They're working together.
They're complementary.
Yeah.
To some extent, we think pure research is important for us because it gives us what I think of as sort of intellectual agility, the ability to be prepared to deal with the unknown. Sometimes we want to create that future unknown, and that will come from our exploration in the research environment. Sometimes other things come in from the outside that would be disruptive, and our ability to react and respond to those in many cases also is attributable to the ground that has been laid in the research area. Strategy, on the other hand, is where we look in a holistic way, not just at the issues technologically, but what's happening environmentally. What are the geopolitics of things? Where do we think there's business opportunities that are likely to emerge from these other factors? That then does indicate to us that there may be certain areas that we want to pursue from a research point of view in order to be able to find a path into some of these new opportunities. So the two things interact, and each informs the other to some degree.
Excellent. So the past 5 years, the bet was on .NET, arguably, as a platform. Is that a fair statement?
Certainly for the developer, in terms of building, say, internet-related applications, .NET was the strategy.
Cool.
Since 2000.
And going forward, like what is the developer strategy going forward, in your opinion?
Well, to some extent, I think of, when we talk about the live platform, I view it as a natural extension of what .NET started. The .NET platform, made people realize that we needed to have a way to write applications, deal with managed code environments, deal with the ability to operate these things in a network environment. But as you start to build more and more complex applications, we also realized that there were a growing set of infrastructural services that were too big for any one company or any one programmer to deal with themselves, and yet they become more and more critical. So these questions of identity or cloud storage or other things, they appear to be important in the future class of applications that people want to develop. So clearly, taking what we've learned in building MSN and Hotmail and other of these web scale properties and platformizing them, both so that we can do more of those ourselves, but also so that we can make them available to people who want those facilities as a component of their own business offer or their own application. That's a critical change. I think that the other aspect of these things is the business model change. To some extent, Microsoft always had one business model, which was we sold software in a way where people paid us for a perpetual right to use a particular version of the software. And I think another thing that's changing now in different parts of the world is that different business models are emerging as also important. And to some extent, there's a platform aspect of that as well. So putting Ad Center into the live platform, allowing developers to be able to use these things in order to not just create the code, if you will, but to create the code and to offer it under a different business model. That also, I think, is going to be quite an interesting change that the developer community should contemplate.
Excellent. So what excites you most for like the next 5 years?
Well,
or X years. I mean, it doesn't have to be a number.
You know, one of the things as we took Bill's job and partitioned it a little bit between Ray and me, you know, we had to say, well, you know, what's the difference? What does he do? What do I do? And you know, we think of Ray as dealing with the cross-company architectural coordination issues as it relates to really, you know, the nearer-term implementation of our strategy, or taking our assets, research assets, and bringing them to bear. And so his time horizon is kind of, I'll say, 0 to 5 years, where 0 to 3 years is the next 1 or 2 product cycles in many of our businesses. And sort of the beyond that is where Ray gets into incubating some stuff that he thinks might be important. You know, my time horizon is more like 3 to 15 years. And where, you know, we've got a lot of this really long cycle innovation where we're incubating completely new businesses, and then where we do the research to be able to lay the groundwork in many of these areas. So when I think about what's exciting to me on this also 3 to 15 year horizon, there are a number of things. One thing that is going to happen that is going to affect developers everywhere in the world is the fundamental microprocessor architecture is going to change probably in the next 5 years. We've basically begun to see indications from Intel or AMD, or pick your favorite microprocessor vendor, where Moore's law, in the pure sense, where they can add more transistors, is going to continue to function. But the corollary that has really improved system performance for decades, which was the ability to improve clock rate, that's hit the brick wall to some extent. And since you can't increase the clock rate anymore, you can't really make individual applications run faster unless you can get more parallelism. So the trend that you see now with the Intel Core Duo and AMD, you know, dual core processors, and the trend line toward quad core and multiple cores beyond that, that's the beginning of a world where parallelism will reign. In many ways, the problems that historically were reserved for the developers of either high-performance computers or data center systems, both of those architectures are going to be combined and shrink into sort of single chip systems. And for decades, we've known that brings forward a set of programming challenges that we used to leave for only the people who had to solve these high-end scientific problems. But to some extent, in the future, if we want to make machines that can see and talk and listen and to some extent be far more helpful than they are today through more sophisticated software, that software in and of itself is going to have to be architected to take advantage of a lot more parallelism and ultimately a lot more specialty architecture. Today, if you look at a PC, there really are a number of computing elements within it. You've got the graphics subsystem, you've got the main CPU subsystem, maybe you got an audio subsystem. I think in the future we're going to see more and more diversity in terms of the different optimizations of CPU architectures against the different challenges we want to throw at the computer, but they're all going to shrink and become part of one more unified chipset. And so we're going to have to develop a whole new set of programming tools to make it easier for people to write highly concurrent applications and to get them right. Today, if you try to write threaded applications or other things that expose some form of parallelism, it's both hard to express, and even when you express it, it's hard to be sure it works. And so that's something that I think is going to be a big change for the global development community in basically the 5 to 7 year time period. But a lot of the groundwork's being laid for that now. Other areas where I'm really excited are sort of in new businesses as opposed to specifically in technologies. I'm responsible, not Microsoft, for coordinating all the efforts the company makes globally in education. And so we're pulling together a lot of that and creating more of a platform for people to be able to do novel things to solve the world's problem in education. Another area that I'm very interested in, and where I think there's just an incredible opportunity both for Microsoft and for the development community broadly, is in the area of healthcare and wellness. Today, in most countries of the world, something bordering on 35 to 40% of all their government spending goes in just these two categories of health and education. It's a huge thing. Yet nobody on the planet is very happy today with the outcomes we're getting in health and education. And both of these appear to be areas where information technologies could be the catalyst for some fundamental changes. And in addition, there's lots of places on the planet that people don't have any good education or virtually no health care. And in this globalized environment we live in today, that's going to create more and more problems for the global society. And so I think these are areas that the company is exploring, and we're moving ahead not just to use our traditional technologies in health and education, but to explore where we can create a platform that would allow other people to be using more avant-garde approaches to these two critical challenges.
Excellent. So, will you be doing some work with the foundation then? Clearly, Bill will be involved to some degree in that area?
I think there'll be a natural symbiosis between what Microsoft does in these areas, both in our traditional platform and applications, and then as we seek to do some new things specifically in those areas. I think one of the things Bill understands now, having had the foundation for about 10 years, is a lot of the groundwork was laid there. But as they look to scale this up globally, and they take not only their money now, but Warren Buffett's $31 billion on top of it, and they really focus on global health and education, particularly for children. Bill knows, and he and I have talked at length at times about the critical relationship that information technology has to the advances in medical technology and conceptual models of education, and that the two are going to have to come together. So while I don't think, for a variety of reasons, that there'll be any direct cooperation between the foundation and Microsoft, because of the necessary separation between the organizations from just a legal and financial point of view.
Sure.
I do think that Bill remaining chairman of Microsoft, my focus on the long-term strategy and ownership for health and education, and Bill's very, very deep focus on those questions in the foundation's work, I think you will see a natural partnership there.
Fantastic. So now, like a lot of the feedback we get on Channel 9 and a lot of developer and customer criticism, I guess, would be the length of release cycles. So how's that going to change over the next, let's go the 3 to 15 year time frame, in your opinion? Like, what do we have to do, say, to get Windows out sooner? Stuff like that.
I think there are several things, and I think that these problems that we have to address ourselves in this space are just a forerunner of the problems that will occur for every organization who's building more and more sophisticated software. Microsoft is just at the bleeding edge of this problem due to the scale of the things that we undertake. But as it becomes more and more economical for people to build bigger systems, they're going to bump into these same barriers if we don't give them better tools. So I think that's the first step, is that we have to have better tools, and we need them ourselves, and I think the programmers of the world are going to continue to need them. One thing that's going to force us in this direction is, in fact, what I indicated earlier, which is that as we change the underlying architecture and we have to build these more complex systems as a set of cooperating processes, there'll be more and more similarity between what it would take to write a .NET or live-enabled web-scale application or service and what it will take to write any application that you want to run in one of these new architecture-type machines. So I think there's going to be a natural convergence there, and many of the things that we've learned in trying to do Live and Xbox Live, we're learning from these things, and I think that they will inform a little bit the evolution of the tools. Two, I actually think software as a discipline, and some people might not agree, but despite the fact that we talk a lot about computer science, and many of us say that we're involved in software engineering, relative to the long-term evolution of other engineering disciplines, I don't actually think software engineering has made the grade yet. And the single biggest thing that I believe it lacks, that almost every other engineering discipline of substance ultimately gets, is it develops a model of formal composability. And today, the way that software has evolved, and the way the language and tools are that we use, it really doesn't allow formal composition. And that's why we struggle so much, not just at Microsoft, but I think everybody struggles to have modularity in our systems, to be able to get effective software reuse. And so all of those things are a reason that we have the challenges that we have, both in terms of the time to get things done, and as the complexity increases, the increasing issues that we all face in, is it secure? Is it reliable? Does it perform well under stress? Is it brittle? If you think of those adjectives, they're all adjectives that we've been faced with as a challenge at Microsoft as the scale of the codes have gone up, and the distributed nature of them and the interconnection of them has gone up. They just expose a class of problems that the fundamental software engineering methodologies have never been perfected to deal with. And so I'm very interested in extending the tool chain in a way where formal composition comes to software engineering. And if you think about it, whether it's guys who design chips and computers, or guys who design buildings downtown, or people who build bridges, they really don't engineer those systems the way we seem to engineer software. You start and each one in a formal way stands on the knowledge and disciplined engineering of the team below them. And today, we've had way too fuzzy a boundary in terms of the architectural layering. As you know, a lot of energy has gone into this current version of Vista, where people say, well, in many ways it just looks like it does what Windows did before. But in fundamental ways, it's completely been re-engineered around these two or three issues. The security, we've developed a completely new model, the software design lifecycle, that has been rigorously applied in Vista in order to change its security posture. And we think that will represent a significant step forward. There's also been a huge amount of work done to tease apart what had grown as a lot of complex interconnections within the system itself. And that was essentially something that made it hard for us to get the kind of layering and canonical testing that perhaps is key to accelerating the product delivery. So for us, we think that doing that, both in terms of training the organization, developing the tools, and getting the code base altered, is in some sense a one-time cost, and that we won't have to pay it again and again and again in every subsequent release. It'll become a new baseline. I think that will be one factor in reducing the design cycle. Even when we look at this long cycle it's taken to birth Vista, one of the things I think it's important for people to realize is that between the time we started doing our work on what was then called Longhorn and what we actually completed in Vista, there was one huge thing that we stopped to do. We stopped to basically completely do a new release of Windows XP. We happen to call it Service Pack 2, but it was driven by our recognition that we had to go back and fundamentally do a lot of work around the security engineering aspects, and that was fairly pervasive. And so we took a hiatus from working on Longhorn for the better part of a year to deliver another version. We just didn't call it a new version. And I think that's another thing to bear in mind when you think about how long the development cycle really is. We know that we need to be quicker, and I think there's another thing that's going to allow Microsoft to be a lot quicker, and that's the notion of the live services and the live platform. To some extent, we'll increasingly partition what we do into the infrastructural part that gets shipped on a fairly slower cycle and with a lot of rigor around it, because you're moving the entire ecosystem forward when you move that infrastructural component. But when you look at the the higher level functionality in the system, more and more that will either get delivered through an online service component, or will in fact have its value add, be a function of the coupling the services. And so I think that if you look at the speed with which we're bringing things to market in the live environment, that's going to be an interesting complement to what are the fairly widely spaced trains that drive complete ecosystem change within the community.
Excellent. So do you think there'll ever be a time where, say, like an operating system like Windows, like way out in the distant future, sort of evolves in the sense that using these live services you're mentioning, or some sort of mechanism like that, rather than have completely new versions per se, it just sort of grows with the addition and subtraction of components?
Well, to some extent, my comment earlier about composability speaks directly to that question. The fact that we don't have formal composition means that it's very hard to just add something new to Windows and be able to predict reliably what the effect of that is. That's a great example of what I'm complaining about in terms of not just Microsoft, but our industry, our architecture, and our heritage is not one that basically forces that level of formal composition. And I think if we can get to that point, and then we ultimately can engineer even operating systems where there's more composition, then that may in fact give us the ability to have it be a more organic, evolving product than the giant monolith that we have to assemble and rigorously test in order to be able to give people the assurances they want related to security and reliability.
Fantastic. So part of being in Channel 9 interviews are, it's about the human, right? It's not just the technology and the role. So question, how long have you been at Microsoft?
I'm finishing my 14th year at Microsoft. I've had sort of 3 careers in my time. I always have been oriented toward being a startup kind of guy. I joined a startup when I was finishing my time at Georgia Tech, and that got acquired by Data General, and I spent my first career as a programmer there for 11 years.
All right.
Then I started a supercomputer company with 2 other guys in Boston, and we built that up, took it public, operated internationally, and I ended up as the CEO of that. And then I came to Microsoft in 1992 in a handshake with Nathan Myhrvold and Bill Gates, basically to do startups inside Microsoft. And that really has been mostly my heritage. I started all the work in non-PC computing at Microsoft. So I did the first interactive television products. I acquired Web TV. I did the first watch product, the first car product, the first phone product, Windows CE, the handheld computers. Wow. So most of the things that today people think, oh yeah, that's just part of the environment. I have media center PCs, I have televisions that are getting interactive, I have smartphones. All that work, we started here in 1993, and for 6 years I started almost every one of those new businesses. And then when Bill decided to move Steve into the president and then CEO role, we put those things which were sort of coming out of incubation into the various business groups at Microsoft, and they've emerged today, to where the company has a significant role to play in many of these categories. And I think that strategy, to go back to the beginning of this discussion, was something that Bill and I developed in the early 1990s, and we've implemented it consistently for more than a decade.
Nice. So you've been working for Bill for a while then. This is nothing new, really.
Well, that's right. No, I mean, I've been a direct report to Bill for 8 years, but to some extent, you can say, even though I had 2 other managers of record in my 14 years, the first was Nathan Myhrvold, and the second was Paul Moritz, and the third was Bill Gates. Nice. Bill was the personal sponsor of all of the startup work that I was doing, and it was his own long-term focus that I think has allowed the company to make these, not only the long-term research investments, but the incubation work on the long cycle innovation that really creates the opportunity for the company to be innovative and competitive in the long term.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time. I think we're in great hands. it's a natural transition.
I think Bill is an icon in our industry.
Sure.
And Microsoft is a bit of an iconic company, and I think that the way that we elected to engineer this change, where Bill wants to go full time to the foundation, I feel very comfortable about. I think we've got a natural partitioning of the roles that Bill played in the company between what Ray does now and what I will do now, and I think we are in good hands, and I look forward to a lot of success in the future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be here.